This is Peter Blackstock, and you're watching Time to Connect.
Hey, Peter Blackstock. Hey, man, how are you doing? Thanks for taking the time to connect.
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Yeah, just here in Austin and working really hard on preview stuff for South by Southwest, which is coming up soon.
Yeah, I was definitely going to ask you about that. I know that I particularly appreciate you taking the time to connect this week because I know this is is this the busiest time of year for you?
You know, this year, I mean, this time and in the fall when we have ACL Fest, yeah, are the two times we can sort of guaranteed being very busy. But this one's a little odd because we didn't have South by Southwest for 2 years, and we feel like we're kind of relearning it all over again. It's like it's sort of a little bit surreal that it's actually happening now. And in 2 weeks, I'll be back out in the clubs doing the stuff that I used to do all the time, but has been relatively rare over the last 2 years.
Yeah, man, it's been a weird 2 years for sure, and I can understand how that must feel. I think it's that way with a lot of different things that as we kind of slowly get back into, me gigging again, it's great. That's probably the thing that I missed the most in the last 2 years when we weren't gigging. Getting back out, like you said, it almost felt surreal, but it's starting to feel a little more normal now. And I'll bet once you get into South by Southwest, it's gonna be just as cool as always. It's changed a little bit since you and I first went to South by. What are some of the ways? What are some of the ways? It's obvious, but maybe you just state what are some of the things that you see that have changed.
Well, it's funny because I was just having a discussion online with someone about this earlier today, which is kind of good prep for answering that question. But the biggest thing is, it's music at South by Southwest is almost an afterthought now, because other elements of what South by Southwest grew into became a much bigger part of it. All the technology stuff is just huge, and that's where all the money is in that industry, and so that's where the money gets spent generally. And at some point they got really involved with political discourse, socio-political topics. And so you have people like, there's 3 Biden cabinet secretaries speaking at South by Southwest this year, and then 2016 Obama came. So the things that tend to get the headlines and are in the spotlight are more that kind of stuff than music, which by comparison, that industry has lost a lot of the power that it had in the 90s when record labels were just overflowing with money, and they would come here and spend a lot of it on all these cool shows and stuff. So you have still a lot of music here, but there's more that is like, private party gigs for some of those tech companies that put them on. You still have some really cool things on the sort of on the fringes of, not part of South by Southwest proper, but places like Lucy's Fried Chicken and South by San Jose, the San Jose Hotel, who do big shows in their parking lots. So I would say that it's lesser than it is from a music standpoint, but on the other hand, it's still pretty huge, and a lot of people still do come just for the music.
Yeah, they do, and I have to be honest with you, man. I kind of avoid it. It's when I do come, I like to hit some of the off South by shows around the kind of the perimeter, like in far north Austin or something. Just getting around downtown these days is kind of crazy during South by. And I was thinking earlier today, Peter, the first time I went to South by, and I know when it was with you in 1988.
Yeah.
When did South by start?
The year before. Yeah. And we didn't meet until fall of '87. So yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And so I assume it was that next spring. And just a quick word on that. I can remember one way that it's drastically changed is we would get out the list of bands and we'd kind of see, let's go see this band at that club, and then we'll get in your car and drive over to that club and see that band, and then we hopped around to different clubs. Wow, those days are long gone, aren't they?
Well, yes and no. I mean,
Oh, really?
to be honest, I'm still going to be doing a fair bit of that in a couple of weeks.
Oh, cool.
It's harder to do that because the city is so much bigger, and parking is so much harder than it was back then. And you know, you can take ride shares everywhere, and a lot of people do that, but that can be kind of pricey. It was easy to do cheap back then, and even though there's still a lot of free shows, many of the things involved, it costs a lot more. I mean, especially it's easier for me because I live here, but if you're coming in from out of town, you know, hotel prices get ridiculous too, and
yeah,
there's Airbnbs, but they're, you know, as much or more than the hotels. So
right.
so yeah, it's a lot different, but you know, partly because I'm you know, I'm not a typical South by Southwest festival goer because I'm covering it for
Right.
the newspaper, and so I have some access to things that other people maybe don't have. So on the whole, it's easier for me, I would say, than it is for the average person just coming to town for South by.
Right on. Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about your writing, how it's evolved, what it's like, maybe some of the misconceptions about what the life of a music writer is, perhaps. But before we get into that, I just want to say that, yeah, you called it. It was fall of 1987 when I met you. We met at 10,000 Maniacs show at the Start Club in Dallas, and a lot of people watch this probably won't realize how incongruent that was. The Start Club was the Studio 54 of Dallas at the time, and having seeing that band there was just so strange. And we met there, and Peter, believe it or not, it's almost 35 years ago. It's crazy, isn't it? A lot has changed in that time. And maybe, if you don't mind, I wouldn't ask you to go through an entire biography, but maybe hit some highlights. I know that, you know, kind of how you describe yourself when someone says, you know, who are you? What have you done? I know you're a music writer primarily, but you might, if you don't mind, go through just a super quick, you know, you were in Austin, started there, and I know at one point you moved to Seattle, and I know there's No Depression works in there, and then for a while you moved out to North Carolina. Can you just do a real quick timeline for us in terms of who is Peter Blackstock?
Yeah, I'll try to make it quick. Well, probably
Yeah.
it might get a little long-winded because there's so many years now, but yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. If it's long-winded, that's fine. It's fascinating.
Yeah, well, you know, I went to college at University of Texas. I grew up in Austin, and while I was going to UT, I really thought I was going to be a sports writer, and I'd started at the Austin American-Statesman when I was in high school, in the sports department. And while I was at UT, I started going out and seeing bands in all the clubs here because it was such a great time for Austin music in the mid '80s. And eventually, I kind of talked the people at the Statesman into letting me write about music for them. In fact, an interview with Natalie Merchant for that very same 10,000 Maniacs tour that we were just talking about was the first thing I wrote for them.
Wow.
And so that sort of picked up over the next 2 or 3 years. And in '91, the full-time music writer job at the Statesman came open, and I really wanted that, and I didn't get it. They hired somebody from Chicago, and I was kind of depressed about that. But I also knew that I didn't want to live my whole life in Austin as much as I had loved growing up here, and as much as I had taken to the music scene. So I moved to Seattle almost kind of sight on. Well, I went earlier in 1991 for a week and just fell in love with the city, and I just said right then, I'm moving here. And you know, so I arrive in fall of 1991, right when Nevermind and Pearl Jam's 10 get released, and so
pretty good timing.
My timing was pretty good. Yeah. It was funny because it wasn't really my kind of music, what they did. I did like those bands, but you know, coming from Austin, I was known primarily for my interest in country and folk music, and then also I was really into the, what now would be called the indie scene, but we really just called it sort of alternative rock back then.
Yeah.
And when I went to Seattle, I got a job at the one of the two daily papers there, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. It was sort of the same kind of thing where I was combining copy editing on the news and features desks with doing some music writing on the side. And they really hadn't been covering music that much. So when I got there, I had, again, the timing was good because they kind of needed someone like me who had some experience doing that. When I guess, I don't know, what was it? I guess 1995, I got to know a guy who worked at the in a monthly publication called The Rocket, which was an all music monthly publication, not your typical alternative weekly that most cities have, but this was kind of different. It was a really good paper, and they were the primary publication that documented the whole rise of the grunge scene up there when it happened. And the managing editor and I became really good friends, and he decided to leave The Rocket and was looking for something new to do. And this online message board on AOL had started up called No Depression, and I found my into that, and finally realized that it crystallized what Austin had been for me was this alternative music and this country folk thing. There was some synergy there that was starting to happen musically too. There were a lot of bands that would have been like the rock bands I saw in the 80s in Austin, but were starting to be more, country and folk influence. And that's basically, how we started No Depression, was sort of seeing that moment and deciding there should be a magazine for this. So we started that in 1995. It grew sort of really quickly at first, and then gradually over the next few years. And by 2000, it was my full-time job. And around that time, there was a lot of great music that we were covering that was happening in North Carolina. And I just decided I wanted to move there, and I sort of wanted a change of scenery and stuff. So I went out there and was there about 3 years. Ultimately decided to move back to Seattle for about 3 years, and it was for a while there. It was sort of back and forth. Ended up in back in North Carolina in 2008, and we ended up shutting down the magazine then during this time that the economy was in ruins, basically in the recession, and the music business and print media were both in turmoil. And we just didn't. We were a pretty small publication, and we did very well for a while, but we didn't survive that. Mm-hmm. I took a little time to work for a weekly paper in the Raleigh-Durham Chapel Hill area, and kind of got myself back into newspaper journalism that way. And then in near the end of 2013, suddenly this Austin music writing job came open, the same job that I had really wanted back in 1991 and didn't get. And this time when I applied for it, I was the guy from outside with a lot of experience that they hired. So it was kind of ironic. And so 2014, I moved back here, and been doing that job for 8 years now.
Yeah, and I assume you're in Austin to stay. Is that you can stay there for the duration, or do you have any kind of long-term plans to leave Austin again?
The West Coast calls me too much. I don't think I will be here permanently. One of the other big draws about coming back is my parents were here. And I lost both of them in the last 2 or 3 years. And that's been difficult, but it also was very good that I was back here. So there were 2 reasons to come back. It was job and family, and also just tons of friends in Austin. I'll always have this great community of people here. But moving to Seattle was huge for me, and I just love the geography and the climate and everything about, and certainly the politics out there are much better than in Texas. So there's likely to be another chapter at some point down the road. I don't know when that will be, but yeah. So I wouldn't expect that I'll retire here, long term.
Gotcha. And I think you probably answered one of the questions I planned to ask you, which is if you could live one city in the U.S. rather than Austin, where would it be? And I'll bet you're going to say Seattle at this point.
Maybe Seattle. There's Seattle has changed a lot too, just like
Sure.
Austin.
Every place has, man. Every place has.
Yeah, right. It's true, and so there's probably, it's more like regions that I love than cities. And if I went back to Seattle, it would probably be in that area. But my wife and I lived for 3 years in a small town on the other side of Puget Sound from Seattle, and we loved it out there on the Olympic Peninsula. So wouldn't be surprised if that could be a possibility. And she also had spent the 80s in San Diego and had really fond memories of that, and has lots of friends there. So we go there a lot, and so I've grown pretty attached to that too. I've always liked California in general, but LA is maybe a little too big for me. But San Diego is big too, but it feels comparatively more easygoing. And
yeah, definitely.
And the beaches there are great, and the weather there is great. So
yeah,
so it'd probably be one of those two areas. Yeah.
Gotcha. I agree. San Diego is incredible. Well, a couple more questions, Peter, about, I'd love to hear your thoughts. A couple more things related to your life as a writer. One, as you know, I taught writing for many years, and one of the things that I know about writing is that it's one of the most challenging things is how we stay objective as a writer, because especially if you've been, it may be a little different for you because you're probably often working on deadlines and it's not something that's sitting around forever. But it's so easy for us as writers to get into a project, and we kind of get so close to it that we start to lose our objectivity. How would you say in general, or maybe advice for young writers in that sense, how do you stay objective as a writer?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit harder for me to address, partly because I'm a music critic and not a news reporter. So part of my job is actually not being objective. But
good point. Yeah.
But generally speaking,
well, let me rephrase it then. Objective about. Do you remember what Ernest Hemingway said when asked what is the single most important quality for a writer to have? Do you remember what he said?
I don't know.
He said a really good built-in bullshit detector. So and that's more what I mean. How do you know you're not so much not being objective about your opinions, but how do you know the writing's good? How do you know, how can you stay objective about,
Yeah, I've never really, I don't know, I've never really thought too much about that. I can say, and this is partly because I spent a lot of time, especially at No Depression, as an editor than a writer. And I will say that the key to that, to me, is just having a good editor. And I've been on both sides of that. And I know I've always had to sort of look for that in other writers when I'm editing their stuff. And I know that I always want that feedback and those voices on the stuff I'm writing. So I think, the bullshit detector is kind of the editor's job, and that's there's separate things, and I've done both, but they're different mindsets, and equally necessary. I think it's harder these days because our landscape for writing in media and social media and blogs and all that, there's not as much editing, and I think writing to some extent has suffered from that. So
I would definitely agree, and editing also makes you a better writer. I have found. I think about the book project I'm working on now. I've been doing a lot of editing in that book, and the different contributions that I'm getting from folks, and I'm already seeing it. That's helping me become a better writer in terms of how I'm going to contribute to the thing. Well, any books in particular come to mind that have been particularly influential on you, or you could take that book, that question as, what are you reading right now? Just what comes to mind when I say books? And either influential books in your life that you've read, or what you're reading right now. How do you respond to that?
You know, I've generally, because the world I'm in has always been magazines and newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
I've generally read media of that type more than books. I'm not nearly as well read as a lot of people I know and as other writers I know.
Mm-hmm.
But I do. I mean, when I do read books, it tends to be more often music related biography stuff. The most recent thing I read is a really great book that Willie Nelson and Bobby Nelson, his sister, wrote together, basically a dual memoir that kind of goes back and forth between, you know, one of them will tell a few pages of story and then the next one, and it alternates back and forth through the whole thing. I learned a lot from that, and I've covered Willie Nelson, you know, in great detail, probably more than anybody else over the last 8 years since I've been in this job. And but I didn't know as much about Bobby, and she is fascinating in her own right. And I also learned a lot about Willie from reading that.
Yeah, cool. I really enjoyed that. Was it Nick Patowski that did the book a couple of years ago, the biography? I really enjoyed that. But yeah, man, thanks for that. I will definitely check that out. Well, that leads me into my next question, which is, what about Bob? Because I too read a lot of music, kind of music bio stuff, and over there on my shelf, I've probably got, you know, 15 or more books involving Dylan. I'm a little bit obsessed with him, and you know, I'm one of those people who perhaps, maybe I overstate it, I don't know, but I'm one of those folks who say we almost can't overestimate the profound impact he's had on the music that we love. And I'm with Steve Earle when he says, you know, we all are, anybody who writes music these days, at least in these genres that you and I live in, we're all post Bob Dylan writers. I've talked too much. Let me just ask you, how do you think about Dylan? How important is he? Was he influential on you? You know, what are your thoughts on Bob?
Dylan was, it was a big turning point for me. I think I was first year of college, maybe first or second year of college. I was like 18 or 19. And I was aware of him growing up, and I'd heard the stuff that was hits on the radio, but I hadn't really done the deep dive. And I can't remember what led me to do that. But once I did, I spent an entire summer just totally immersed in it. Was so ridiculous in a way, and so immersive that summer of '85, for my 20th birthday, I had heard that they were gonna restart the Newport Folk Festival in Rhode Island for the first time since like 1971. And of course, I knew all about Dylan's history there, and going electric there, and the very controversial show that he had there in like '66, I think. And I just decided I wanted to. It was the weekend of my 20th birthday, and I just decided I want to go up there because I think Dylan maybe will show up unannounced. He wasn't booked for it. There was like Joan Baez and Arlo Guthrie and some of the other sort of usual Newport suspects. But Dylan was hardly playing at all at that point. He had been many years of just not touring, which is hard to remember because he tours so much now and has for kind of a long time.
That was right. That was a couple of years probably before the Petty hookup and the Petty tours.
Yes, it was. And at that time, he still, and of course he didn't show up at Newport, but within about a year after that, he did. The Petty thing happened, and he did start touring. And I saw him when I was an intern at a newspaper out in California the next summer. That was the first time I saw him, was with Petty in Costa Mesa, I think, in Southern California. And have seen him, I don't know how many times I've seen him overall. You know, it seems like a lot to me, but compared to, you know, some people, not much at all. It's probably a dozen or 2 dozen times. I'll be seeing him next week here in Austin. He's playing
Right.
right smack in the middle of South by Southwest, but not part of South by Southwest at all.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
that's fascinating.
but yeah, his the songwriting, nobody could touch him, and nobody still can. I don't think he's in a
Yeah.
class by himself. The comparison I often use that is, I think common is he's the Shakespeare of our times.
Yeah.
I don't, we kind of got to wait 300-400 years to see if that holds up, but it's just the body of work and quantity and the quality and the diversity of it are hard to believe sometimes. And we covered him, quite a bit in No Depression when we were doing the magazine. And one of the interesting things about coming back to Austin is for many years until just a few months ago, Austin guitarist Charlie Sexton was sort of the major guy in his band. And there was another Austin guitarist, a blues player, Denny Freeman, who died recently, who had been in Dylan's band for a while too. So there's connections here to him that are that are interesting, and it's kind of funny because they're all sort of like, I think, kind of contractually sworn to secrecy. Because I remember when the Murder Most Foul thing came up last year or two ago.
Yeah.
And it just came out of nowhere. Nobody knew what the deal was. And so I texted Charlie and I said, "Are you on this?" And he was like, "I don't know."
I don't know.
They're just told to not answer anything about Dylan, I think, basically. So I've never really talked in detail with Charlie about what it was like to tour with Dylan, other than just kind of on the surface about how it impacted his life. But it's been a cool part of that is having some people in his inner circle that are part of the Austin community.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Dylan's been secretive since he was very young, and really just almost to a weird fault of being secretive. How were you with the Nobel Prize? Was that a surprise to you, or did you get in arguments with people about that?
I don't think I did. It was a little bit of a surprise to me, but in a good way. I thought it was very well deserved, and I was very happy with their willingness to expand the horizons of what a Nobel Prize for literature could be, and I thought it was very deserved. Yeah.
Right on. Well, Peter, one of the things I've been asking people in this series is a question that most people don't want to answer, and they struggle with. So we'll kind of open up the question a little bit. The question is the old, okay, you're on a deserted island and you can only take one album. Which one is it? If that's too hard, and you've got a few up here to choose from that I'll bet you like. If that's too hard, maybe list a few. What are some albums that maybe you've listened to that you can see yourself listening to over and over, and will probably continue?
Somebody just a few days ago was asking on, I don't know whether it was Twitter or Facebook or somewhere. The question was, it was similar to that, but a little different, and in a kind of a quantifiable way. And that was, what are the 5 albums that you've listened to the most in your life?
Gotcha.
And I say quantifiable, not really, because nobody keeps count of that, but you probably have a pretty good idea of what you listen to more than anything. And it's going to be weighted more to stuff in your youth because you've had a longer amount of time to listen to those. But if I can remember the 5 that I chose, one of them was Jackson Browne, The Pretender. One of them was 10,000 Maniacs, In My Tribe.
Yeah.
One of them was REM, Fables of the Reconstruction. And one of them was my longtime favorite Austin band, Zeitgeist, Translate Slowly.
I knew you would pick that. Yeah. Right on.
I forget what the 5th one was. I remember after I listed those, I thought, I probably should have put Bob Dylan, Bringing It All Back Home in there.
Yeah.
I think maybe the other one that I chose was Alejandro Escovedo, Gravity, his first solo record. So that'll give you,
Yeah.
some idea of what has made this lasting impact on me.
Right on, right on. Let me, I want to kind of start wrapping up here, and maybe we'll go to some, what I've been calling some Colbert style rapid fire questions. And it's okay if you don't want a rapid fire answer, but the idea is for just a quick answer, and we'll just see how this goes. If you could meet yourself at 21 years old, what's one thing you would tell yourself?
The answer should be rapid, but I'm having a hard time being rapid with that. I think maybe everything's going to work out,
Yeah.
I think I was probably more angst-ridden then, and got more easygoing as the years went along, decades went along.
Right on. What are you most proud of?
Probably 13 years of no depression. Yeah, I think the work I've done for the Statesman has been significant, but that's the legacy that is going to kind of be there for a long time, I think.
So here's one out of left field. What happens when we die?
Everything is gone. That's the way I look at it. I'm not a religious person at all. I'm not. I'm more agnostic than atheist, but and I'd love to think that reincarnation is something that happens, but I'm not counting on it. I look at it as just the lights are out and everything. You lose everything at that moment, is what I think.
And a lot of people, a lot of theists struggle with that and say, well, then why is life worth living? And I don't know about you, but the answer is pretty obvious to me. That makes it even more worth living.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, what scares you?
I'm not a big fan of horror movies.
Okay. Okay. I thought you might mention something about the current politics. It's pretty scary to me.
Yeah, when I think of scary, I think of
Yeah.
What's a frightening thing, but
Okay.
no, you're, and this is part of the difficulty with the rapid fire thing, is to think what's the first thing that comes to your head.
Sure.
But yeah, I would say more, once we talk about it a little more, the thing that scares me the most right now is there will not be a democracy in the United States in the next few years, potentially. I don't necessarily believe that's the case, but I never thought it was possible that would be the case, and now it's very possible.
Yeah. It's hard to know at this point. It's really hard to know what is possible in the next 10 years. It's a little bit scary. Well, let's see. What would you say is, if you had to choose one word or one phrase or one concept, is the secret sauce to having a happy life?
Equanimity.
Mm-hmm. Very Buddhist.
One word. Yeah.
Very Buddhist answer. That's good. Now here's just another total switch in gears. This one's really hard for you because, without a doubt, you've been to more music shows than anyone I know, probably threefold. It's your business. And I know at one point, do you still keep a log of every show you've been to?
I do. I started in the fall of '88, and I've got a list of everything I've seen since then.
I've shared this with you before, but I sincerely think people would be interested in seeing that in book form, even if it was a lot of those entries were just listing the name of the artist and the venue and the date, but then you could annotate, with real short paragraphs, a lot of the highlights for you. Man, I think that's a book. I think it's a book I would be interested in. I know that most of my friends would buy that book and be interested in it. So I hope one day you'll do it.
It could be a retirement project. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, let's make this the last question, Peter. When you are dead and gone, what do you hope people say about you?
Just that I was a good human being, and a good writer and a good friend. That I changed the world for the better, I guess, in a small way. I don't think my ability to have an effect on things is I think relatively limited, but in what ways I can, I have always and still try to do things that I think is going to make the world a better place. So I'd like to think that people thought, yeah, he did.
Yeah. Well, man, I can say that about you now. You've been a good friend. You have changed my world in some ways. You've turned me onto a lot of great music, and I've really enjoyed knowing you all these years. I appreciate you taking the time today. I miss seeing you. I'm going to be in Austin a little bit on South by. I'll let you know, and if we can hook up, great. If not, hopefully down the road we'll see each other. But Peter, thanks so much for taking the time today, and we'll see you down the road.
Sounds good. Thanks.